Hello and welcome. You are listening to the Investor Lab, the auditory epicenter for passionate people seeking a life of freedom, choice, and abundance. And on today's episode, I had a really interesting and insightful chat with an amazing investor. Her name is Olivia Ward, and she's not even 30 years old yet. She's already got 5 properties. She did that in 5 years. She's overcome a lot of challenges, serviceability barriers, and all of that kind of stuff. And there's so much learning to be taken from this episode. This is part of our Investor Stories series, where we're really digging into the stories of average investors and what they've been able to achieve so that you can learn more, grow more, and become a better investor yourself. Now, what I find really interesting about this journey is not only did she kind of stumble across kind of getting a couple of things right in the start, but she's also then developed a really robust strategy. And we talk a lot about understanding your why and how to use that as the biggest tool to help you get from where you are to where you want to be. So if you are, look, I really think that if you're at any level of your investing story, I think this is going to be beneficial. You got to remember that 94% of property investors never even get past 2 properties. And Olivia is at 5 properties and she's not even 30 years old. So she's done an amazing job. And so what you're going to be able to learn from her is how to start thinking about some of this kind of stuff so that you can get to where you want to go to. And of course, if you want help to do that, then of course we can help you do that too. So we obviously run a buyer's agency service, which is, we're not promoting this in this episode, but if you do want help to achieve that, and if you do want help to kind of bypass some of these challenges and to get to where you want to go a little faster, you can reach out. Just go to theinvestorlab.com.au. But even if you don't want to use a buyer's agent, you can go there and get heaps of free resources and tools and guides so that you can go do it yourself. We give away so much information because we have a passion and a mission to help serve you get from where you are to where you want to be. And if there's anything we can do to help support that, then that's what we're here for. And if you've liked this episode and if you like this podcast, make sure you hit subscribe on Apple Podcasts or share it with a friend or loved one. Or if you just want to reach out and let us know how you feel about it, then just send us an email, send us a message, or get in touch in some way and let us know what you think, because your feedback is what makes it all worthwhile for us. And I hope that you enjoy this conversation as much as I had having the conversation. And without any further ado, let's get stuck into it. I'll see you on the inside. Hey guys, welcome back to the Investor Lab. Joining me today is Olivia Ward, who is an exceptional investor who has traversed a lot of challenges that I think a lot of other people are going to face and has found a lot of success as well. So Olivia, I am excited to welcome you to the show and to dig into a little bit about your story.
Thank you. I'm very excited to share all my learnings and talk a bit about property with you.
Awesome. Fantastic. So, look, you and I have spoken before. We've had the benefit of interacting now for a fair while in different ways, online and on the phone and all of that kind of stuff. So I know a little bit about you and your story and where you're at. But for the benefit of people listening, do you want to just share a little bit about kind of who you are, where you are, what you do, and all that kind of stuff, and we'll get into it from there.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Goose. So I suppose I found my passion in property probably about six years ago or so. I knew as a child that it was something that I was interested in just because I saw some adults that I looked up to investing, and they kind of made something out of it. So I knew that was something that I wanted to get into, but I just didn't know like any of the nitty gritties or details. So still have a normal full-time job, and I thought to myself, it's not something that I want to do forever.
Okay. How old are you now?
I'm 29.
You're 29. Okay, so 6 years ago, you were 23.
Yeah.
And that's when you bought your first property?
I bought more when I was 24. I started getting into how I was going to go about it at about 23.
Okay, so what specifically kind of triggered that? Because a lot of I can tell you, when I was 23, I was pretty much I was a loose unit. I was traveling and I was partying, and investing in real estate was not on my agenda at 23. What was it about? What was it for you that was that catalyst?
Yeah, great idea. So for me, it was more around my partner and I just bought this block of land, right? Because it was one of those things where we bought a property, and just because it was something that our parents had told us to do, when I knew it was something that we should have done as an adult, but I didn't really know why. And then when I bought this block of land, it was within about 6 months of sitting on it, waiting for it to settle. And I realized the property market had boomed. And my broker had contacted me and he was like, "Hey, Liv, have you seen the value in your area? It's gone through the roof."
What area was that?
It was in Clyde, north of Melbourne. And it had just gone completely through the roof. And I didn't really understand why at that particular time. And I was like, "Oh, this is exciting. Like, what am I going to do with that money?" So that's, I think, was when I got into what do I do with this? I don't just want to sit on it and do nothing with it. I want to help my future in some way. But I think it's because, I looked at around some of the people that I, like my parents and whatnot, and I thought to myself, I don't want to be like all those people that are older than you when they're, in their 50s and their 60s, and they're like, don't work for the rest of your life. I didn't want that for myself. So I thought, well, I've got this block of land over here. It's magically made this money. How do I leverage that in some way? What do I do with that? So I think that's where it kind of started for me.
Okay. And so that was just, at that stage, that was just a block of land that had no house on it or anything? Okay.
Just a block of
Interesting.
land.
Okay. So, and that settled when you were 24?
Yep.
And how long did it take for it to start to go up in value?
Okay. So really good question. So I made specifically, I think we made like $180,000 in, was it 18 months or 12 months? 12 or 18 months. I can't remember specifically.
Wow.
Which was huge. So the second that after the land had settled, then I built this house, I instantly had a broker, had a bank walk in on the day that house was, I got the keys, and I had a broker go in to reevaluate it and pull out that equity instantly.
Okay. So you still built on it before you took the equity out?
Yes. So still built on it before I took the equity out.
Okay, awesome. How much did it cost to build on it? What was the cost? And what was the cost of land? What was the cost of construction? Roughly, just your ballpark.
Roughly, I think the land cost like 200 grand. Yep. And then built the house for also about 200 as well. I think it was like 215, something like that.
Yep.
And then the total I think was at like 420, something like that, around that mark.
Was that sorry to interrupt. Was that off the plan, or was that, did you buy the land and then separately go out and find a builder, or was it a package deal?
No, it wasn't a package deal. So I separately went and found the
okay, cool. So about total about 400 grand into it.
420, yep. Something like that. And then got it reevaluated the second it settled for 600,000
wow.
the next day. So, and all I did was sit on it. And, I did pay for the increments of the land, of the mortgage, like increase.
Holding costs, yeah.
Holding costs, yep, 100%. But yeah, and that's why I was like, what do I do with this now? And that's where my real journey started, where it's like, what do I do with this equity that I've just literally just landed on, that I didn't really know what to do with it. And that's when, my learnings really came.
Okay, cool. So tell me a little bit about, like, not just tactically what happened in your property portfolio after that, but basically what I'm hearing from you at this point is like, okay, like pretty much any young person, you sort of like bumbling along, you're working, you're like, hey, I guess we should buy the house, do the house thing, right? And you kind of get a house, you get land, build the house, and it's like, oh my God, hang on a second, I've got a whole bunch of cash. So that was the kind of moment where you started going, I better take this a little more seriously. Or how did that shift your mindset, and where did you start seeking out information about what to do next?
Yeah, good question. So I identified pretty quickly that I didn't really have anyone in my life that I could go to for answers, because no one had really, that I'd grown up with, had really sort of excelled or had shown that they'd been successful with property in that way, that I wanted to sort of take it to. So then I went to YouTube, to be honest with you. It's the first place I went. I started finding some local guys in Australia who'd, there's one Sydney guy who'd reached 100 properties at the age of 27 or 28. And then started listening and reading books. Books was a big one for me, learning from Robert Kiyosaki, all those sort of like-minded people. And I then started to get into the details of like, what is next? What do I do with this? Who do I listen to for advice? And I think that's one of the most important things that I learned early on is, listening to good old Uncle Bob, who's like, yeah, you should buy your one house and pay that down. And then what? And I've still just got this one house that I then still have this debt. I've still got to pay rates and everything on it. Like, that's not what I wanted for my lifestyle, because I watched my parents and my grandparents still slave away, having to pay for those additional bills that don't ever go away.
Okay, interesting. So I'm going to come back. I reckon I'm going to circle back to some of that. But so you bought the land, you built on it. It went up in value. You probably manufactured a little bit of equity by building and all of that kind of stuff as well. So probably a combination of market and manufactured equity there. And then you kind of went, hang on a second, I better go and start, check out YouTube, get a few ideas on what to do next. How long was it between then and your next purchase? And what did the next purchase look like?
Very, very quick, actually, probably within about 6 months. So I had to work out my borrowing capacity and what I was going to do next. So So I had like maybe about $120,000 of actual cash to sort of play with for a deposit. And at this stage, I was in the very early stages of listening to my mentors about, buying below market value, buying with an upside for growth and with a high rental yield. And I went out and sent a text message, ironically sent a text message to a whole bunch of, adults who hadn't necessarily experienced or achieved what I wanted to achieve. And I said, what would you do? Should I buy, with this deposit, should I buy one house in Frankston that would be a bit negatively geared, or should I buy two houses out in this regional town that I found that have got an upside for growth, high rental yield, and I could buy under market value? And everyone had suggested to me, buy this one house in Frankston. And I was like, my gut had told me, like, who am I listening to here? These people that I've sent these text messages to, have they achieved where I wanted to go? No, they hadn't. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to go against all of that advice and go with the one sort of mentor that I had listened to who had experienced what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go. And awesome. I went with my gut, and it was the best thing that I did for my portfolio. And I went and bought those two out in a regional town in Victoria that I found. Whereabouts
in Victoria?
It was Traralgon, it's called. And those two properties that I bought out there at that time, they are my most, the best performing properties that I have. That are my most stable, that I can rely on.
It's so funny because I grew up in that area. I grew up in a tiny town just outside of Traralgon, and so for me, I always kind of looked at. I was like, I had proximity bias where I always just kind of thought that Traralgon would never do anything because I grew up there. So we probably missed it. I know that we sort of missed a bit of that boat because I was like, oh, surely not Traralgon. But it's so funny because it's grown so well. And I think that and I want to dig into like what these properties have done for you as well, because I think this is one of the big things that the mistakes that people make is they think that just because you go to a regional area that it's not going to perform. So so tell me a little bit about the properties you bought and how they've gone since.
Yeah, good question. So essentially I did some research, some basic things that I knew at the time that I could research. Was like, how do I find out if there's even going to be value? Actually, I owned a caravan out in that sort of area, and a friend of mine had suggested, I should buy out in Traralgon, like just in a passing comment. And I was like, actually, you know what? I'm going to look into the rental yields out here. Let's check this out. So I looked and I was like, whoa, the rental yield's huge out here. If I can purchase around this particular price, I'm like, they're so low as well. And then I was like, oh, but what about the increase of the market value, so within the area? And then I found out that the government had a huge plan to some $500 million plan for something to do with energy out there. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. I'm like, that's kind of got some growth in it. Started talking to some real estate agents calling around in the area. And they were like, we've actually found some people taking their houses off the property market because they foresee that there's about to be a boom. And I was like, well, that's interesting. So I went with my gut. The numbers sort of added up. I found out that there was a lot of properties. This is another good leverage that I had. A lot of these properties were sort of sitting on the market for so long out there that the real estate agents were struggling to get rid of them. So that gave me a bit of leverage to get some good deals.
Can I ask whereabouts in Traralgon? Like what parts of Traralgon are they in?
So how do I describe that? The one's like a 5-minute walk from the CBD.
Yeah.
And another one's probably about a 5-minute or 3 to 5 minute drive from Traralgon CBD. The one's like on one side and one's on the other side.
Okay.
And they're both performing well. Instantly was able to pull out equity because I bought them below market value.
How did you know you were buying them below market value? Because this is something that's quite we obviously love buying under market value. But there are a lot of people out there who say that buying under market value is something that you can't do because market value is whatever the market will pay for it. So, which I disagree with, and you've obviously experienced the other side of it. So how do you define whether something's under market value? How do you know if you're going to buy something that you're going to be making money on the way in?
Yeah, good question. So I think it was at the time when I was talking to the real estate agents that the properties were on the market for so long, and that with my previous selling experience, I could wean myself into this. So it was me literally comparing what was being sold on realestate.com. So I would do the comparison on real estate and work out, okay, what are these 3-bedroom houses being sold for? Of these in this exact sort of street, how can I get that property 20, 30K under market value. And I got one of them about 40K under market value, purely because this one particular owner had it on the market for 12 months and just wanted to get rid of it already. And then I found a similar one as well for the same sort of reasons.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting because Gabby and I did something quite similar. We bought a property for about $40,000 under market value, and then instantly pretty much bought another property with basically no real money. Which is awesome. Okay, so you bought 2 properties in Traralgon. What yields were they?
One was 6.9. I think another one was like 7.2, 7.3, something like that.
Awesome. Okay, so you've still got the property in Clyde?
Yep, still got the property in Clyde.
Okay, and then you used that to go and buy 2 properties in Traralgon, under market value, potential for growth, solid yields.
Yep.
Great. And they've been growing in value, so they've gone up in value as well?
Yep, they've gone up in value, which is awesome.
By about roughly how much percentage-wise or whatever? Like has there been much growth or just a bit?
Just a bit, but the fact that I had purchased them under market value really assisted me. I think now recently, I haven't even had a look in the last probably 6 months since, well, obviously coronavirus, but I think there's also sort of a change in the market out there again. So I have been looking into that recently, but I've been able to pull out the equity pretty much straight away to help leverage for deposits for the next one, as well as stamp duty as well. So from there, it was all about how do I get the next one? Okay, cool.
And then, so what was the next one?
Yeah, good question. So the next one ended up being something that we bought with our super in our SMSF. And the reason I went to that one was because I was a person that was like, I like to know that I'm achieving and getting results and taking action on things. And at that particular point in time, we had actually kind of got stuck for serviceability to leverage to purchase the next one. And the one that had held me back was that first property that didn't really tickle the boxes that I'd learned to now go looking for. So my first property was kind of holding us down from a borrowing capacity sort of power. So that's when I was like, until I work this out and until I work out how I'm going to increase the serviceability to be able to purchase the next property, because I had deposits, but I just couldn't get another loan for the next one. So I was like, you know what, I can do the SMSF thing for now. So we went and did that and purchased one up in Brisbane with that. So obviously that's not going to necessarily help me right now with cash flow because you can't tap into that until you retire, obviously. But it was something to help me still learn how to purchase properties under market value because the concepts are still the same.
Yep. And so tell me a little bit about that one. What type of property was it? What are the characteristics? Whereabouts?
Yeah, wonderful. So that's in Brisbane. It's in a suburb called Riverview.
Yep.
So it's a 2-bedroom townhouse, again, pretty high rental yield. That was about 7.8, 7.9 sort of rental yield. That was extremely cheap. It was only $159,000 I purchased that property for. Mm-hmm. So with this one, I went with a buyer's agent. For myself, I was like, I didn't want to put in all of this time to build those relationships with a whole bunch of real estate agents to be able to purchase those properties under market value. There's an area that I didn't really know, and I'd realised that, well, if this market's going to go up, like how do I rapidly build my portfolio? Because obviously we're going against time here, and I wanted to make sure that that I kind of got in just before there was any sort of peak. And I'd heard that Brisbane and Gold Coast hadn't had a much of a, it's kind of been flat for like 10 years. And I was like, well, what happens if it does have a sort of a peak now? How do I get in ASAP? So I leveraged into a buyer's advocate up there who also taught me quite a fair bit. And not only got sort of like a cheap deal for me, but also was with that high rental yield and an upside for growth as well.
Okay, awesome. Did you have any reservations about buying a townhouse in terms of, potentially having lower growth or lower land component or strata fees or anything like that? Did that ever come into be a consideration for you?
Yeah, so the strata fees were definitely something that I did learn about was the water rate up in Brisbane. If it is like in a multi-complex, you can't necessarily, it's very difficult to charge for the water usage. So that was one thing that I did learn that I now will make sure that I celebrate from here going on. Yeah, in terms of the strata fees and everything, so that was included in the rental yield that we'd calculated as well.
Yeah.
Throughout the year, it was actually extremely cheap strata fees for this particular place, $1,800 a year, which is pretty cheap for a strata fee.
Yep.
But there's awesome growth for in that corridor of like Brisbane through to Gold Coast, and we're obviously starting to see that now shine through. So pretty excited about that growth because there's heaps happening up there.
Awesome. Okay, so we're up to 4 properties now. We've got 3 out of the SMSF, 1 in the SMSF. Is that it, or have you worked out how tell me about how you've worked out how to overcome your serviceability issue?
Yeah, good question. So first of all, I realized that I was constantly trying to get like my own debt down, right? And after speaking to brokers, whenever they'd say, no, this is how much you can leverage, I identified that, hang on, am I asking the right questions here to my brokers? Should I be asking things such as why? What is it about my borrowing power that is holding me back? So then I looked into how can I leverage off my first property. That was the main thing within my portfolio that was really holding me down because it wasn't bringing in much rent considering the mortgage that I had against it.
Yep.
So essentially, we worked out how can I increase my income in my other properties. So I did a small renovation on one of my Traralgon properties, which then gave me a little bit more in terms of my borrowing power. I then dropped off a nasty personal debt that I had as well, which was not helping me in our serviceability at all.
Was that a credit card or something, or?
It was just a personal loan. So I had for a car loan essentially, and I dropped that. I got rid of that ASAP, paid it down as quick as I possibly could. So that then using the some equity from one of the Traralgon houses, as well as the increase from the rental yield help with the serviceability, I was then able to use that to then leverage into the using it for a deposit for the property number 5. And then I just had to save for the stamp duty, which is not easy when stamp duties are quite a large cost. Totally.
But that's okay. So now that's property number 5 in total, 4 outside of estimate. And is that kind of where you're at now?
That's where I'm at now. Yep.
Okay, awesome. So that's a pretty good run. So how old are you right now?
29.
29. Okay, so you bought your first property when you were 24.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's 5 properties in 5 years?
Yeah, just about. Yeah, nearly.
Yep.
Yeah, about to turn 20. About to turn 30. I nearly turned 20 then.
Yeah, no, nice. Okay, awesome. That's pretty good because considering a lot of people don't, I speak to a lot of people who don't even start thinking about investing until they're in their 30s or even in their 40s. So it's pretty awesome that you've set yourself up in that way. What do you think has been the biggest challenge that you have faced, either mechanical or non-mechanical? So it could be like technical or mindset wise. What's been the biggest challenge you've had to overcome to do that? Because I got to say, most people never, 94% of property investors never get past 2 properties, 73% never even get past 1. You've gotten up to 5 properties and you've done it in 5 years and you've done it before you're 30. What makes you different? Why have you been able to do this? And what's the biggest challenge you've had to overcome to make it work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it comes down to your why, to be honest with you. A lot of people talk about this, but it's just, and I think we talk about it because it is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And my why for me, I had to really delve deep because a lot of people are like, well, because I want cash flow. Well, but why? What are you going to do with that cash flow? Let's get detailed. And my why was, well, I wanted that time. And I think that time is the ultimate wealth for me. And I wanted that time specifically. Now let's get nitty gritty. What are you going to do with that time, Olivia? And I found that my passion is that I would love to one day be able to travel around Australia to teach young people the importance of getting financial education. Not teach what it is exactly. I'm never going to know everything, right? But at least the importance of going to get that financial education and starting with kids as well, because kids are my passion, and I think if you can start earlier on, you can really hit compounding on the head. And then there's a lot of kids out there that want to know this sort of stuff. I've got a lot of friends whose kids are like, at high school sort of age, and they're passionate about it. That's where my passion was. And I think that's where my why came down to: what do I want to do with my time? And what do I not want to end up doing with my time, which is working and slaving away until I'm 60 or 70 years of age.
Why is it important to you to educate other kids about financial education? Why is that the thing? Because it could be anything, right? So why that? Like, why is that the thing that drives you?
I think maybe it was because that was something I was looking for when I was younger. I didn't learn those sort of things at school. I was told to go to school, learn these books and do these exams and pass these exams based on your memory. And I was like, I'd learned that's not something that had sort of interested me. And I struggled through school. I was actually a year 10 high school dropout. So I didn't make it past year 10. And people had told me, maybe you could go be a nurse, and I dabbled into that, or go do some sort of trade. And I was like, it's not necessarily, but if I do that, I have to do that for 60 years, and I don't necessarily want to do that. So I think the fact that I was told that, sort of like I had learning difficulties in school, and I realized I don't think it was that I had learning difficulties. It was just that I didn't get to learn about the things that I wanted to learn about, nor was it in the ways that I wanted to learn, which was real experience, just going out there, doing things, failing from some of those things, but celebrating those failures as well, because they're lessons that we learn. In school, you get taught, do the exam, pass the exam. If you pass the exam, or no, you fail. That's bad. In the real world, it's the opposite.
But where did you learn that? Because I agree with that wholeheartedly. That's how I've lived my life too. But most people don't think like that. There's a reason that most people don't achieve what you've achieved already, and it's because they don't think about failures are successes and all of that kind of stuff. So where did that kind of mindset come from? Because that must have started before you even started your property journey. So is that something you got from your parents, or?
I think the start, no, not from my parents. It was all the books that I read. It was all the YouTube videos that I'd watched of people. I'd learned from. I read like a lot of personal development books, like yourself. Probably not at your level, but it was something that I delved into early on, and it was just something that I knew that was for me. That was like that kind of sits well with me. So yeah.
Okay. What's the most important or the most transformative book that you've ever read?
Oh, that's a tough one. The one that's always, I'd have to say Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad. Yeah, for sure.
Game changer. That was a game changer for me too. That was the book that started everything for me. Yeah. Okay. I got another question for you. You've obviously, as you mentioned, like you've had a lot of kind of failures along the way and all of that kind of stuff. And you've learned from those failures. You've seen them as opportunities. What's your favorite failure? What's the best failure that you've had?
Best failure that I had was actually leading up to the property market, was understanding my debt. I purchased a car. I was like 18, I was about 20, and I was like, yeah, this car's awesome. It's my dream car. I'm going to have it. Bought it for $35,000. But I realized that I actually paid $55,000 for this car.
Ooh.
And right. And guess how much I sold this car for?
Probably 15.
5,000. So I realized the debt that I'd gotten into was not going to get me anywhere very quickly. And I think understanding that the difference between an asset and cash flow and all that sort of stuff. So so buying that car was a huge thing that was sort of holding me down from a serviceability point of view early on in my journey.
And okay, that's good. That's great advice, because a lot of people don't understand that. They don't understand that when they buy these things, it can actually be holding them back, and they look at what they can do now rather than what they can do later. Okay, so you're up to 5 properties. You've got a vision and a passion to want to educate others and change other people's lives and all that kind of stuff. When are you going to be able to start doing that? What's stopping you from doing that now? How far are you from that goal?
Yeah, good question. So for me, I think I'm still in like this learning phase of how do I go about it? how do I let people know that like this is the value that I could add? And one of the biggest things for me is what I would like to offer to the community is how can I travel around Australia free cost to you? So, for example, let's just say if I targeted schools, for example, or community centres, how can I offer my service for free? And for that, I would need some sort of cash flow coming in from my properties to be able to give me that time so that I can do that for both myself and my family. So at this stage, what I'm trying to achieve is that ultimate cash flow for me to be able to retire from the workforce so that I can travel around and offer my service for free. That's what I'm trying to aim for by the age of 35. We'll see if I achieve it over the next 5 years.
Okay, you go for 5 years. 5 years. All right. Well, we're definitely going to stay tuned in because I want to see how this journey progresses. So, what advice do you have to other people that are, maybe in a similar boat, or even just anyone listening to this? What advice have you got to them that for people that maybe haven't yet gotten started, or people that are maybe kind of sitting on the sidelines, or they've got big gaps in their portfolio? What kind of advice or guidance would you give to other people who are on this journey and want to try and achieve more?
Yeah, good question. I think it's definitely, your biggest one is making sure that you're getting advice from those who have already achieved what you want to achieve. I think that's one of the biggest ones. The next one is also, for me personally, around identifying your strategy, which is obviously something that you talk a lot about. My strategy is buy and hold and live off the rental yields by 3 buckets, which is buying under market value, upside for growth, and high rental yield. But it's also, for me, about celebrating your learnings is probably the biggest thing. So I learned very quickly whenever there was something that didn't go so well, to actually be consciously aware of what didn't go well, what could you have done next time, and how can we prevent that from happening again. For example, one of the things that I experienced was with one of my Trailgun properties. I didn't know that when I went and got a building and inspection report done, that they didn't necessarily check the pipes, the underground pipes that led into the house. And I'd learned very quickly that that when they are really old and they don't check that, there's a lot of issues that come from that. So I did have to pay quite a fair bit to get all of that fixed. I think celebrating those learnings is also a big one as well. If there's another one, also asking your why. So when, for example, when you have a broker explain to you, this is where you're stuck at right now, like you can't borrow anymore. A lot of people are like, okay, no worries. I suppose that's the answer. For me, I was like, well, tell me why. What is it about my portfolio, my serviceability, my borrowing power? What is it that's holding me back? And getting to the nitty-gritties and the detail of that. So that's another big one as well.
Awesome. That's good. There's some good advice in there. Where do you see the market going in the next 1 year to 5 years? I'm very interested in your perspective because you're obviously quite bullish on property. You're obviously into it and you want to keep being into it. How do you see the next kind of year or two shaping up in terms of the Australian property market?
That's a good question. As you always say, Bruce, every market, every street level is a different market, right? And I think for me, if I like to stick to sort of like those bread and butter properties, right? So those properties that humans will always need. They will always try and find a way to put a roof over their family's head. And I think as long as I stick into those sort of areas, it is quite broad when I say that, but I think as long as if I stick to those sort of fundamental buckets of, a bread and butter property that a family will always need, I feel quite confident that's within like a growth area. I do foresee that the property market as a whole in Australia will continue to grow. And I think that's got a lot to do with like inflation as well. So for me, I was like, I'm watching everything sort of inflate. I'm watching the government consistently print all of this money. And where's that money going to go? It's got to go into something. And I look at sort of things like, the government and the Fed and everything that sort of backs us up, as well as the IMF. And they don't want the property market to fail. It really kind of like holds us up. So not that I'm relying on the government because I don't rely on the government to always have your back as much, but I think it's understanding that humans will always need a property and will do whatever they need to put a roof over their family's head.
What do you look for when you're looking for an area with an upside for growth? How do you define that?
Good question. So I really do lean on a lot of the sort of buyer's agents like yourself for sort of those areas that are going to have like that growth in that sort of area. It is extremely time consuming. And to be honest with you, that's why I personally like to lean on buyer's agents that know the nitty gritties of every single area, because it took up a lot of time for me when I was purchasing in the Traralgon area. I was researching probably 6 to 7 hours a day for like 6 months. And I was like, I don't know if I can continue to do this, because it was becoming an effort. So I was like, how can I leverage off buyer's agents who already know that sort of information, who can sort of steer me in that way to find those sort of areas. So buyer's agents are a big one for me now moving forward, because I don't necessarily want to spend a massive amount of time on doing that research.
Totally. You got to look at effective hourly rate and all of that kind of stuff. Because I speak to a lot of people who are like, I think the worst one that I'd come across was, I think he was spending about 30 hours a week on research, and he'd been doing that for 6 months. And then when I calculated the cost of 30 hours a week for 6 months, plus the opportunity cost, plus like the real cost in terms of hourly rate, I was like, oh my God, like it was tens of thousands of dollars. So I think it's a really, really good point. If you can use that leverage to get your time back, because as you say, time is the most valuable resource that we have. You know, so if you can leverage that back, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, definitely. And you also get into like that analysis paralysis sort of stage as well. You're like, how much do I need to know about this area? Like, where do you draw that line? And if you can just stick to some sort of framework, it can help you say, all right, it's ticking these boxes. Now it's time to like get in and make a deal.
Yeah, awesome, great stuff. I think this has been a really great conversation. It's been great to dig into your learnings and your portfolio, and I think a lot of people are going to get a lot out of this. Have you got anything else you wanted to say before we wrap up?
No, I think that's about it. My most important advice is just find out your why. What's going to push you? Because if your why is not strong enough, you're not going to do it.
Yeah. 100%. I couldn't agree with that more. Well, thanks for your time, Olivia. I've really appreciated it. I think, as I say, there's going to be a lot of gold to pull out of this conversation. I really appreciate you sharing your story.
No worries. Thanks for having me here.